This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to announce the release of my new book, Obama's True Legacy: How He Transformed America. There's a reason why Mike Huckabee calls it a ferocious and chilling read. Order it now at Amazon.com or at FrontPageMag.com. Thank you, and may God bless you. Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, marijuana, psychosis, and mental illness. With us this evening, Heidi Swan, the author of A Night in Jail. Heidi, what an honor and privilege to have you on the show.
Jamie, it is such an honor to be here and to speak on the Glazov game. I called it the game. I apologize, the gang. I am so honored to speak to your audience tonight.
In a way, it is. We've even thought about calling it the Glazov game, haven't we, Annie?
Thank you for having a sense of humor about it.
Absolutely. Well, we got to laugh a little bit because as I prepared myself for this show, Heidi, and reading your book and researching you, this is very, very troubling times. And but before we get into all of it, let you introduce yourself to our audience.
My name is Heidi Anderson Swan, and I'm the co-author of A Night in Jail, and it's the first fictional story that illustrates the short and long-term mental health risks of marijuana use. It's inspired by my brother's true life. He was a homeless drug addict with schizophrenia who went to jail 18 times. And now that he's sober and receiving treatment, we decided to write a book together because we wanted to tell youth how they can protect their brains. And we wanted to tell them about the mental health risks of using marijuana, especially as a young person. And so I'm also an advocate. Didn't intend to be one, but what I see happening in our state, in my own city, in our country is so disturbing to me, and I can't help myself but to speak out and to help protect our youth and adults as well. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share what I know.
Well, thank you, Heidi. And sometimes a bit of my style and the way I do things is I see things a little bit as a puzzle, and I'll just put a piece in here and there, and then it all kind of sometimes makes sense at the end. So let me just put one piece of the puzzle in. I think I'm getting old because I talk about young people now, and it kind of scares me. But when I was young, and young people, my generation, yeah, people smoked weed, it existed, but not like people smoke now. Like, I'm around young people, I talk to young people. And I was even talking to one gentleman recently, and I said to him, young people, I think it's like 75, 80% of them smoke weed now. I mean, this is what young people are telling me too. And the gentleman replied, Jamie, it's not 75, 80%, it's all. Now, I think that that's a little much. I don't think it's all, but the very fact that he said that definitely means something. Heidi, something has skyrocketed, hasn't it?
Yes, yes. And it's the commercialization of marijuana, and it's the fact that our government is behind it. They're saying, yeah, we can legalize it. And also, it was just, think of what happened during COVID. All of these places were shut down, but marijuana shops were kept open. They were called essential businesses. And people think of it as their medicine, and they're told, the industry tells them to use it all day long, to wake and bake with it. They have products that you can eat in the morning that are infused with marijuana, and they tell you how to use it discreetly so that no one can catch you doing it. And they make products that are attractive to children, and they are directly marketing to children. In fact, we have a bill in our legislature this year called AB 1207, and that is to put protections around the industry going after children. And if Prop 64, that's what we voted for here in California to legalize marijuana, if that was being followed, we wouldn't need AB 1207 today, which means the industry is not doing what it said it was going to do, which was not allow kids to have access. Instead, they're doing the opposite. They are marketing to them directly.
Heidi, you know what's very interesting and telling throughout my life as I sometimes try to speak about the dangers of weed with people, but with weed users, there's it's a very interesting resistance. There's all kinds of denial. Oh, it's not addictive, it's not addictive, and yet so many people I grew up with, they can't even calm down. They can't even live without a joint, and now without gummies. But at the same time, they'll tell you, oh, it's not addictive, I can quit anytime. But it's very, very evident that it is addictive, and that there are a lot of these people are addicted. Another very interesting thing is, oh, it's just weed. You know, it hasn't affected me at all. And I don't mean to be cruel and mean, but I'm just being honest that with so many people in my life that smoke weed and have smoked weed that really earnestly are telling me it doesn't affect them, I'm talking to somebody that has clearly suffered brain damage. And so look, and now, and I've been watching your interviews and following all the research you've done in your work, and as you're pointing out, back in the 90s or whenever it was, you know, you smoke a joint or there's weed or whatever, there was a certain percentage of THC in there. But now, in terms of these gummies, in terms of the marijuana now, the milligrams in that particular substance has skyrocketed. Combine that now with Prop 64 and legalization, we have a bit of a time bomb, right?
And an industry that wants to make a profit off addiction. It's called addiction for profit industries, and that's tobacco, alcohol, marijuana. Pharmaceuticals are also in that category, sorry to say. But and the way that this industry makes money is that 20% of the users provide 80% of the profits. So you want people addicted. You want those users who are using all day long, every single day, because they are the ones that are coming back again and again to the dispensaries, the pot shops, and buying these high potency products. And that's why these high potency products are so valuable, because the people who are addicted need more and more just to feel normal, because they're so addicted to it.
Heidi, tell us about the milligrams, just what the milligrams and the concentration was during the normal time, and now what the milligrams and percentage and concentration is now, which is so scary, because what we're going to get into is that, yeah, some people might just get high and giggle or get relaxed, but with a lot of other people that are predisposed to certain things and get paranoid, there can be just a loss of touch with reality. There could be psychosis, there could be schizophrenia. And in my own life, in terms of friends and communities, and friends that I had, there's a lot of scary stories. There's people that, one, particular individual we know just smoked one joint, just became schizophrenic. And there's many of these stories. So if the percentages and concentration has skyrocketed, this is very disturbing. So tell us about this.
So this is something that's very personal to me, because my family, we have a predisposition to mental illness in my family. And this was not something that was talked about when I was growing up. And even if it was back in the 70s and the 80s, when I was being, a teenager, we didn't know that there was any kind of a link between marijuana and mental illness, but we do today. And so my grandmother attempted suicide. She was institutionalized, and she was given a frontal lobotomy. So it's really, really tragic. And my father had a really tough upbringing, because his mother was gone for so much, because she was institutionalized. And then the people who have this predisposition in their family need to stay away from environmental risk factors that can that can pull a trigger for psychosis to happen. And so, and marijuana is one of those. And I'm a perfect example of this happening. I had psychosis once when I was getting high, and I was with my best friend at the time, and she was fine. She had no problem. It was very, very low potency THC, and this is what you were asking about. It was about 3% THC in the 70s. And in the 90s, it was about 5% THC. That's how low it was. And so on 3% THC, I lost touch with reality. And it was so scary. I mean, I was like, I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who my friend was. And I was in my house. And it was so, I was so scared. And it lasted for a long time. And finally it went away. And I was like, I really don't want to do that. I really don't like that. But my brother, he liked that. He really liked that feeling. To him, it felt like he was in the fun house. And so he did it just a little bit every day as he was growing up in his teens through middle school, high school, college, graduate school. And, we came from a good home, a loving home. But when he finished his graduate school education, his brain wasn't working so well. And the data shows that marijuana reduces your ability to remember things, and it lowers your IQ. And so when he graduated, he wasn't able to pass his exams. And so he was addicted, and then he went on and tried cocaine and then crack, and then he was homeless and he was in jail. And so we are and with schizophrenia. And he's been diagnosed with schizophrenia. So we are the perfect example of a genetic predisposition to mental illness that could be triggered by low potency marijuana. And the vast majority of studies have been done on 2 to 8% THC. Now we cut to today in 2023. And the potencies, the flower, the green crackly stuff that you can buy at a pot shop in California is like 20% THC, and that's a conservative estimate. I've heard upwards of 30-40% even. But now the high concentrate products, the edibles, what's called the dabs, the wax, the shatter, the vapes, the vape pens that kids are using, they're so pretty. They're colorful. They don't smell like marijuana. They smell like fruity flavors. And these are 50 to 80, 90% THC. And so that's over 20 times stronger than what I was using. And so, I'm very concerned for the kids today. I'm really concerned for the kids who are predisposed to mental illness like me, because if I were in today's world and I took a hit off of a high potency product, I would have been like the friend that you described, where it was like you just got high one time or two times, and I would have had a serious reaction to it. And I know people that have had terrible family members that have had terrible reactions to it and committed suicide, had terrible psychosis. It's so tragic, and we have got to be honest with people about this. So thank you so much for bringing this up, Jamie.
And thank you for sharing. And I'm glad you're okay, Heidi. And our heart here at the Glazov Gang goes out to you and your family and the things that you have described. I'm a Christian. In no way do I want to impose my views, anything like that. I'm just kind of putting it on the table, and then we can discuss perhaps what your faith or vision is. But for us Christians, it's very, sometimes I don't know what words even to use, but it's very sobering and telling how Satan can work, because how he presents himself. Because in the Garden of Eden, when he comes to Eve and he says, oh, this is in your interest, and just eat this apple and everything is going to be great, and just this rainbow is here, and then all of a sudden we know what happened. Now, why I say that is just how evil masquerades itself. And so, sometimes even when I'm watching these advertisements on TV, it's just haunting. They're just discussing some kind of drug, and there's just these people running down a hill, and they're smiling and laughing, and there's these rainbows, and I don't know, and everybody's really happy and they're having a barbecue, and then all of a sudden at the very end it starts going, and you may get suicidal thoughts, you could die, and I don't know, it's very creepy, but at least they say this could happen while they're showing the people smiling running down the hill. At least there's a warning. So everything that you're saying now, it's just such a weird environment now, because when I look around me, I just don't understand what everybody's just these vapes, and they're vaping and they're vaping, and they're all these young people. I mean, what is it? And it turns out that this is a drug, or in most cases, but there's a rainbow around it. You know, it just these gummies, and they taste so good. And but now in terms of everything that you're saying, you would think that if the state has legalized all this, the percentages of THC have skyrocketed, you would think that there would be a piece of paper when you buy it, and there would be a label, and people can read exactly what you just described, but the label does not come with these substances, does it?
No, but it does in Colorado. They
Oh,
fought really hard.
okay.
They fought for a bill. It's called HB 211317, and they were successful. They had almost unanimous bipartisan support. And they have their products come with an educational resource, and it warns about psychosis, hallucinations, schizophrenia. It warns about vomiting. Have you heard about the problems with vomiting, Jamie? This
Tell us about it.
Oh, well, a lot of people, some people think marijuana is good for nausea, and it is, you know, people use it for cancer, but at the higher doses, at the higher potency products like what we have today, almost across the board, the opposite effect is happening. It's making people throw up, and then they can't stop throwing up, and then they'll go into the emergency room, and this is a diagnosis of exclusion. And so the
Just a second. They start throwing up. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh here. Just sometimes I don't know whether to laugh or cry. That's what my laugh signifies. They start throwing up and they can't stop throwing up?
It's called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, CHS.
Okay.
Yeah. And a friend of mine from San Diego, who's an emergency room physician of 30 years, she coined a name for it. She calls it scromiting, because it is such a distinctive sound of screaming and vomiting at the same time. And they see it frequently here in California, and they see it also in Colorado. So I got distracted. So that's
Wait, I'm sorry for distracting you, and sorry for interrupting. So yeah, let's just get back on that. So in Colorado, that's a good movement that there's labels, but in California, there are no labels, right?
right. So it's not actually a label, and the advocates there would speak to that very strongly. It's an educational resource, and it's actually a few pages, and the pot shops are required to hand this out to their customers when they purchase the high potency marijuana products. And it shows them what a dose is, and which is, you know, half a piece of rice. That's what a dose is of these high potency products. And it tells them about the risks to anxiety, depression, psychosis, schizophrenia, etc. And so they have that in, and they have warning labels in Canada, and they also have warnings in Connecticut, and where else? But in California, I volunteered with a bill last year called SB 1097, and that was to put mental health warnings on THC products, because there's a huge disconnect in our state, like you described, that everybody's, you know, using it and seems to be carefree about it, but they have no idea what the short-term risks are or what the long-term risks are. And so we fought for this bill, and it got almost all the way through our legislature, and then due to pressure from the industry, it was gutted so much that the bill was pulled. And so we do not have warnings here in California, and we really need them. And now we've got another bill that's going through our Senate right now, SB 58, and that's to legalize psychedelics. And it is over halfway through. It just passed a committee this week, and it's going on to the next one. And I mean, okay, so there are several drugs that can cause psychosis. when you use them. And marijuana is number one. It converts at the highest rate to schizophrenia. So if you use it too much or once on the wrong brain, like you described, Jamie, it can convert to schizophrenia. And then second on the list at the highest conversion rate is meth, and then psychedelics are third. We should not be legalizing psychedelics, and they are rolling it out in the same way that they did marijuana. They are talking about all the health benefits of it and how it's, you know, the last resort solution for people with mental health problems, and we should absolutely support it. It would only be used for them. But the truth is that they're already marketing it to children. They have already made chocolate bars with psychedelics in them, and they've mixed even with THC, and they are selling these already in California, and they have cartoon characters on them. And that's the truth about this addiction industry, is that, again, they say it's not for children. They don't want children to use, but an addiction for profit industry needs addicts to be profitable in the future. So that's, that's the really sad thing about our state legislature and about them not protecting us, and about allowing the industry to push them around and to not warn our citizens here in California. And I have a friend in Northern California, and his son was a medical marijuana user. His name is Kevin, and he thought that marijuana was his medicine, and he used it, and he became psychotic, and he became aggressive, and he was violent towards his parents. And his parents said, you know, it doesn't look like this marijuana is doing you any good. And he wouldn't speak to them for a while, and then finally he ended up telling them that marijuana had ruined his life, and he took his own life. And this young man was in his 20s. And this is all from his use of what he thought was his medicine. And people don't hear about these stories. And then a story about psychedelics also having harm. There was just recently a festival, a music festival in Washington State, and a 26-year-old man was there, and he took shrooms, and he thought that the world was coming to an end. And so he had access to a gun, and he killed 2 people, and he shot others. And this is from psychedelics. And so how can we allow this to happen and not tell anybody that it's happening? And I am just more and more surprised by this as the days go by. And in fact, I was going to speak about this at the National Alliance of Mental Illness. They have a state conference in California in next month. And I was going to speak about those of us who are predisposed to mental illness, and that we need to be warned about substances because they can have catastrophic effects on people. And I just found out 2 weeks ago that I was canceled, that they rescinded my invitation because they said that, oh, well, you're going to talk about marijuana, and marijuana is too touchy. So it's not just our government who isn't warning the people about it, but NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, doesn't want to talk about the harms of marijuana. And so I sent them an email. This was just a couple of weeks ago. And I said, please explain to me how, in the worst addiction and mental health crisis of our state, talking to people about how some substances can cause psychosis in some people is too touchy or controversial. Please explain that to me. Because my brother says that if he knew that marijuana could cause him to become mentally ill, he never would have tried it. And that would have saved him a lifetime of suffering, of being in jail, of misery. And tell me why you don't want to prevent this kind of suffering in our own state. And they never replied, Jamie. And so this is part of the silence. This is part of the disconnect of what you see when you see these people who are using all the time going, oh, it's no big deal. It's a gummy, it's a vape, it's a this, it's a that. This explains how people just don't know, because the marijuana industry can make whatever claim they want. And then the people who are paid to educate us are not, or they're telling us a little bit of the facts, but not all of the facts, like what's happening with NAMI. And let me just say that substance-induced psychosis is 100% preventable. And so we should be doing everything we can to be preventing any kind of mental illness, especially today, especially with our homeless problem, as bad as it is. And all you need to do is look on the street and see people suffering from substance-induced psychosis and schizophrenia. And how can we not try and prevent more from happening?
Yeah, I wonder if there is a war on humanity by certain powers that be. Heidi, in terms of these shrooms, a lot of people around me, once again, I see it everywhere. There's this micro-dosing now. And, but you hear some good things. You know, you hear here and there that somebody had PTSD and apparently they're better. Somebody was very traumatized or worried about something and had some kind of mental syndrome. They seem to have got better. Other people felt better. But, okay, there's those cases. Then people say even the people who did feel good and all that, you know, how are they going to feel 3, 4, 5 years from now? But that's just talking about the good trips, the temporary nice feeling or healing. We don't hear about what you're speaking about, and in terms of this microdosing of mushrooms and the negative effects it can have, this is silenced and not spoken about, but it's a very, very real reality and threat, right?
Absolutely. And that it can convert to schizophrenia should scare everyone. And you don't know if you're going to be the one, or your friend is going to be the one, or your child is going to be the one that's going to be afflicted with a long-term mental illness. And I am all for studying drugs and putting them through the process. We have prescription THC. THC is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. So we have that. We know about the side effects. We know what all of those things are, and it can be prescribed from a regular doctor. And so we should do the same thing with psychedelics, because maybe there is something there. Maybe there is something that can help people, but to put it out onto the legal market, the way the legal market, the way that we have marijuana, I think will just create more trouble that we've already seen, more catastrophes. In fact, I read a story just the other night from someone on Twitter. They're called Mad in America. And this woman talked about her years of using psychedelics and how it ended up causing her a lot of trauma. And one of her dear friends was doing the same, and he ended up getting very sick, and he fell and hit his head, and then he died. And this was because the shaman who was leading him was not taking good care of him. It was really a fascinating story. And she said, I wish people would talk about this too. I wish people would talk about that it's not always good for people.
Yeah. Heidi, thank you. We're going to get a quick word from our sponsors.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell. Years ago, when I invented My Pillow, I was faced with every adversity you could think of. No retailers wanted to sell My Pillow. That's come full circle. Vendors took advantage of me, and I was copied by China. Well, by the grace of God, I was able to get through all that and learn from it. I have a passion to help other U.S. entrepreneurs, and that's why I created my new platform, mystore.com. We have hundreds of products from amazing entrepreneurs, and to celebrate, I'm going to put My Pillows on mystore.com right now. You can get my standard My Pillows regularly $69.98, now only $19.98 with your promo code. Or you can get my standard queen size, regular $79.98, now only $29.98. Or you can get my premium king size, regularly $89.98, now only $34.98. So go to mystore.com and use that promo code on your screen to get huge discounts on all My Store products. Thank you and God bless.
And we are back with Heidi Swan. Heidi, welcome back to the program. I want to crystallize something at the risk of repetitiveness, but I think it's just very important in terms of all the risks and damage and these nightmarish effects of drugs and marijuana. in terms of marijuana now, back in the 90s, in terms of even the statistics, what weed smokers were smoking, there could be, let's say, hundreds of joints. Now, in terms of just even a couple gummies that looks just like chocolate, in there is actually hundreds, if not thousands of joints just in one or two gummies. Am I correct? Because of how many milligrams are in these substances now.
Yeah, I mean, it's what did I say? I made a video on this, and people can go to the Every Brain Matters YouTube channel. It's called "This Much THC is Not Medicinal," and it talks about what the milligrams were back in the 90s, and it shows what they are today. And so 4 joints from the 1990s is worth 1 joint today. So the flower itself is 4 times stronger.
This much THC is not medicinal. Before passing 1317, an 18-year-old could purchase up to 40,000 milligrams of concentrate per day. For example, if it's 80% THC, that's 32,000 milligrams of THC per day, which in simple terms is 1,600 times the dose of THC that's recommended by the FDA. And this matters because the higher THC concentration makes people at much higher risk for things like addiction, psychosis, anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation, especially those whose brains are still developing. Some of the benefits from this House bill include more restrictions on doctors, tracking purchases, decrease the products being diverted to the black market. The limits on concentrates is now restricted to purchasing not more than 2 grams of THC per day. And the education about and warnings about mental health and physical health consequences. Since this bill passed, we saw a 52% decrease in 18 to 20-year-olds with medical marijuana cards. That's awesome. Protections work.
Heidi, it's incredible the advice that's given too. So you would think if something's making you feel bad, the advice should be from the authorities of, yeah, probably don't do that. But what we have here is in almost all of these cases, somebody comes to whoever, the people in charge or the seller or the elites, and they say, hey, I got kind of paranoid on this. And then instead of the person, the authority in charge saying, oh, you got paranoid, yeah, probably a good idea to stop doing that. They tell them, oh, you know what, you probably got a bad strain of something that doesn't suit you. You need to go back and just get another strain or another variety, quote unquote. That is absolute madness and evil, that this is the suggestion to people who are verbalizing that weed and marijuana is making them crazy.
And so a lot of people, even the people that you were talking about who are marijuana users, and they really don't want to hear about the harms and they don't believe that there are any harms, they at least acknowledge that some people get paranoid on pot. But what a lot of people don't understand is that paranoia is one of the first symptoms of psychosis. Because if you think about it, if you're paranoid, you're convinced something is happening when it isn't. And so psychosis is a break from reality. It's when you can't tell if something's happening or it's not. You might see some things, you might hear some things, or you might just be completely confused, or you might be delusional. And so paranoia is like opening the door It's the front door to psychosis and to schizophrenia. And so, so that to me, it's so important that young people especially understand that if you feel paranoid when you're using marijuana, or if you see someone who is paranoid when they're using marijuana, then that is an indication to stop immediately, because that means that, like me, their brain is sensitive to the negative effects of marijuana. And I looked up just exactly this question: what should I do if I feel paranoid on pot? And I found it on the biggest marijuana company in our country. And I found it on their frequently asked questions page. And it said, what should I do? And they said just what you said, Jamie. They said, come on in and try a different strain, because really, you don't know where you got this marijuana from, do you? You don't really know what kind it is, do you? But if you come in and talk to our bud tender, he'll set you up, or she'll set you up with a different strain. And so, I mean, to me, that was just horrible, because they're blaming the victim. They're saying, oh no, this is a you problem, and you just need to try a different kind, instead of taking responsibility like the drug manufacturers you talked about on TV, who go through the full list of side effects.
It's incredible, the options that they think. You know, I'm getting really paranoid. This could lead to schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. I gotta go back and get one that's right for me. How about just stop using it immediately? But as you're saying, this is the advice given by the sellers and etc., right?
Oh, yes, yes. And yeah.
Heidi, so it's not just, you know, before we thought in our society, back in my day, you know, which was the 20s, or no, okay. So, well, actually I meant 1920s. We're already in 2023. Okay, so this is why I didn't become a comedian. But Heidi, we thought about like college professors, you know, somebody at Woodstock, or university students, but now it's children and also seniors. What do you think of this? Like why, like, so they're obvious, you know, in my view, there's definitely an attack on children on many realms, but this is another issue. But kids and seniors, just speak of that, speak about that for a moment, because maybe children and seniors are not the people, these are the last people that maybe should be smoking highly potent THC.
Yeah, and so I can give some anecdotal stories to go with the data. So there's been a rise in emergency room visits, a sharp rise since legalization. And I just saw a conference yesterday from Smart Approaches to Marijuana, who discussed how there are as many, it's very close, on par with emergency room visits for marijuana as there are for meth. Alcohol exceeds them, but marijuana and meth, and marijuana is supposed to be so safe. How come people are going to the emergency room for it? And one of the reasons is accidental ingestion by children, because they see these candies that look like candies that they eat all the time, or chips that they might eat, or I mean, it's just so wrong that we allow this. And they get it because they find it in their home, because their parents are using it, and the parents think that they've hidden it, or maybe they don't remember where they've left it out, and the kids are finding it and they are eating it, and children have died. There was a young man, I think from West Virginia, a 4-year-old, who ate gummies and he died from it. And then children are going to the emergency room, and there's no antidote for this. They just have to sit there and get through it. And some of them, I mean, they're not responsive. And we don't know what the long-term effects are on them. We don't know what the long-term effects are of these high potency products on adults. But can you imagine a child ingesting a bunch of these high potency candies? And it happens all the time. We hear about it on the news with middle school and high school kids that are bringing these to school, grade school kids, they're sharing them with each other. But toddlers, what is happening to their developing brains? It's just, it's unfathomable to me. And but it's happening. And so that's why we're trying to put restrictions on what they're allowed to make and how they're allowed to package them. And then also with the senior citizens, and this is what I've just heard from friends of mine. I had a dear friend who passed away this last year from cancer, and she went to see her oncologist, and she was just in so much pain, and he said, look, there's nothing else that we can give for you for pain. Why don't you just go ahead and get something from a marijuana shop? And she and her son were like, okay, well, what should I get? And he goes, oh, you just go there, they'll figure it out for you. I'm like, what? Why would he say that? He can write you a prescription for THC. And she said, no, he said that he could lose his license for doing so. And I'm like, no, there's legal prescription THC that you can get. So her son went and he picked up, he got advice from a bud tender, somebody who works at the pot shop. This is someone who makes probably, what, $20 an hour, and they don't have any medical training whatsoever. And he's providing medical advice for a woman who has cancer, and she's taking all of these other drugs. And does this bud tender know that if you mix marijuana with, say, blood thinners, that a person can start bleeding internally? Do they have any of this information? They don't. I mean, and so her son just bought her some things and brought it home. And I mean, it's really pretty packaged. And I mean, she used it and she went downhill very quickly thereafter. I mean, did it have anything to do with her marijuana? I have no idea, but there should be education around this, and the doctors aren't being provided with it. And the doctor even just skirted it aside. And then you hear stories about people who, senior citizens whose adult children say, oh, you should try marijuana, this will help you. And they get the products for them. And again, what other things is this senior on? They don't even know, and they think you can just mix it in there like it's a cup of tea or something, and you can't just throw marijuana into the mix. And so I know of a woman she's on antidepressants, and she takes an anti-anxiety, and she drinks a glass of wine, and she mixes marijuana in so that she can sleep, and she's been to the emergency room like 7 times with panic and anxiety. And so mixing these things is not healthy, and it can also cause heart palpitations. It can cause seizures. I mean, we have got to be honest about what is happening, and people just don't know. So yes, seniors step into the emergency room. Children are going to the emergency room.
Heidi, sometimes I just want to be careful and respectful of my guests because the Glazov Gang believes in certain things politically and stuff, and I often don't want to drag a guest into necessarily our view of a lot of things. So just in terms of what I'm going to say next, for me, it's very, very interesting what's not allowed to be discussed in our society or what's frowned upon. And so there's certain potions and needles lately that are injected into human beings, which are kind of harming them, but for some reason we're not seeing this very much discussed on MSNBC and The View, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's many, many other issues. And perhaps you and I may agree to disagree on some things. I don't know. I'm just putting that on the table here. But what I'm getting to is that there's so many of these issues where in our establishment media you cannot discuss, and it's very interesting. And I find very interesting that Heidi Swan, the things that she's saying on my show right now, I can't really remember seeing this on television. Why aren't you on The View? Why aren't you on ABC and MSNBC and CNN? It's very interesting that everything that you're saying is so humanitarian, and you're simply giving a heads up and warning that some of these substances could be harmful to people, and yet you are actually marginalized and silenced, and maybe not in a direct way, but in a very silent, indirect way that voices such as yours, I mean, when I found out about you, I was like, wow, yeah, I have to bring her on because this is not discussed. And what do you think is going on there? That's very interesting that this is very frowned upon, the warning that you're giving society.
Well, two things come to mind. First of all, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome was discussed on, I can't remember if it was ABC or CBS recently. So I've got to give credit where credit is due. They did talk about it, and they did a profile later in the evening about a young man who died from it. He was 17 and he could not believe that marijuana was causing him to throw up. And so he kept using it and he ended up dying. And they profiled his mother and they talked about it. So, the word is starting to get out. But at the same time, now let's talk about the NCAA. And they're talking about taking marijuana off the list of banned substances. And there is a doctor who I just read a quote from, and he said, oh, you know, all the people need to get up to date on marijuana. All this reefer madness is just outdated and silliness. And I'm like, a doctor just said that? Has he not seen the research? And for him to use the word reefer madness, that is a very, very old reference. So he needs to read about the new studies. And for instance, there's one that just came out this last May it's a Danish study going over 50 years of data from 1972 to 2021. And they found that 25% of the cases of schizophrenia might have been avoided if the users did not have cannabis use disorder. This is a huge number, and men are most especially at risk, young men ages 16 to 25. And that is just tragic. And so, and this is interesting because, so that covers 1972 to 2021. And so, and meanwhile, so sorry, I'll circle back to this doctor. So did he read that information? So if we're telling college athletes that, no, we're not going to test for this anymore, which is basically saying you can use it, that will make some people say, oh, well, they wouldn't take it off the banned substance list unless it was safe. If it wasn't safe for us to use, then they would ban it. And it's sort of like legalization today, that our government wouldn't allow this if it wasn't safe. Well, it's not safe, and it has been allowed. Smoking cigarettes is not safe, and it's allowed.
Heidi, so sorry to interrupt because we got to go. I just want to very quickly touch on just a couple points here before we go. Heidi, I think it's very important to stress, as you stress, just on the show here, okay, it's always dangerous. There's always risks. But also, if you're 30, 35, 40, it's a little bit of a different context there. It's still risky. Lots of things are risky. But to a child, a kid, to somebody that's under 25 or 20 or under 18 or whatever it is, when the brain is still developing, smoking marijuana, highly destructive and stops the development of a young brain, correct?
It does. Yes, and so there's a necessary process that happens in the prefrontal cortex. It's called pruning, and it doesn't. Our brain doesn't finish developing until we're in our mid-20s, and for men even older than that. Some say 28 years old, and so that might be one of the reasons why men are more at risk for this. So the marijuana specifically interrupts this process, and people can have long-term effects, long-term IQ loss. They can have anxiety for their life. They could have depression for their life because of their use of marijuana as a youth. And to me, this was one of the cruelest things about marijuana, is that a person can use it and then they can quit. And up to 8 years later, they can develop schizophrenia.
The effects can happen later. It happens later. Heidi, just want to say before we go, there's always people that are very close to my heart in the sense of my dad and mom in the Soviet Union kind of couldn't stay quiet, and they risked the Gulag. And I don't think I'll ever be as brave as them, but they're symbols to me, and I tried to also make a change, no matter how unpopular I may be in society. So for those, there's a lot of human beings on this earth that see an injustice and see people causing pain and hurt, and they turn the other way and they walk away, shrug their shoulders and go about their business. But there's other people who risk a lot but stand up to say something and do something. And you're one of those people, and I just want to give you my love and respect and admiration for the kind of person that you are. Thank you for what you're doing. And just in the closing minute or two, just give us your final thoughts.
Well, first, I want to say thank you for providing a platform for me to speak out, Jamie, and I appreciate your heart of speaking truth to power. And I stand here, or I sit here, I should say, and I am the grateful recipient of information from across the globe. I am friends with doctors and scientists and researchers everywhere who are trying to stand up and to speak about the harms of marijuana. And so you providing this platform is helpful to all of us. And so, and just one quick thing that I would like to say before we close off, and this is a little bit of a segue, but we have had such a problem with violence in our country with mass shooters, and we should be doing mandatory toxicology reports on them. We should get hair samples and we should test them, and we should make whatever substance they have in their system public so that people begin to understand how these drugs, all kinds of drugs, are impacting mental health. And so I really am weary of people saying, oh, we need more mental health treatment. We need prevention education. We need to teach people how to keep their brains healthy so that they can have a healthy brain for life.
And in a lot, there's a lot of these cases where people smoked a joint or took these gummies, and all of a sudden they were stabbing somebody and stabbing themselves, etc. These cases exist. It's interesting that in these mass shootings, if somebody like me said, hey, did they look into whether this person took some gummies or smoked a joint? People would say, oh, Jamie, be quiet. You have conspiracy theorists or something. But chances are they probably did.
Well, I mean, and one example is the Uvalde shooter. And he was a marijuana smoker, and he was mad at his coworker reported to the New York Times, said he was mad at his mother and his grandmother because they wouldn't let him smoke weed all day. And they were telling him to stop. And he murdered all these people. And this was reported in the New York Times. And then on the online version, they removed that. They took that out. And so people don't know. And we have a long list of shooters who were users of marijuana, and we need to be sure that we are talking about them. And now we have road rage incidents going up.
Yeah. And Heidi, I think I'll have to bring you on for round two because we're bringing up all these issues now, but with COVID and the lockdowns, I mean, wow, so many people, I know so many people just stayed at home and smoked weed all day. And a lot of them actually didn't stop, and they decided they don't need to work anymore because of a whole bunch of other reasons and how the government makes that easy for you. But that's for another time. Heidi, a lot of people are on the edge of their seat right now who actually might want to get involved and help spread the news, spread the warnings, support you, check you out more and what you're doing. Where do they go?
Well, anightinjail.com, and that's my website, and that's where they can find my book. And I made a wonderful short film that was I co-produced with a teenager who directed it. We had 8 teens on the cast, crew, and film. They're working on this film. It's so good. And so I want this story to get out to schools so that people can learn about the harms, young people can learn about the harms of marijuana. And it comes with a scientific toolkit that was curated by longtime schizophrenia researcher, Dr. Christine Miller, who has been my supporter all these years. And so we have the scientific data to back up the themes of the story. And the toolkit is free on the website anightinjail.com.
anightinjail.com, right? And you are also, pardon me?
Sorry, and the book is on Amazon.
Yeah, and you are also Heidi Swan on Twitter. Heidi, thank you for being a noble truth teller in our world today and for trying to make a difference for the safety and the health of human beings. Thank you so much.
Jamie, thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful time.
Thank you. Thank you. anightinjail.com. Please visit there. Thank you for watching the Glazov Gang tonight. Please subscribe to our Rumble channel and click instant notifications. And we'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.